Hello! This is the Millennium Review with Sophia Bach,
Alessandra Cardelli,
Isabel Alegria,
and we're a student-run podcast based at FSU that wanted to talk about literary material spanning decades. The whole point of the Millennium Review is to go back in history and see how these lit pieces are still relevant today, culturally, socially, politically.
Exactly. And we thought the name was perfect because time is subjective, so we're kind of just going back in time, stopping all the clocks, all that good stuff.
So first we're going to do a little intro on what's going on in the English department for anyone who's interested, and Belle's going to start us on that.
Okay, so some of the things going on in the English department for the month of October is the graduate-run literary review, the Southeast Review, is having a Halloween fundraiser at the Bark on October 17th from 6:30 to 9:30. Their featured fundraiser has discounted prices to raise money for the literary magazine. And the Kudzu Review, a student-run literary review for undergraduates, has a fundraiser at the Bark tonight called Spooky Night from 5 to 7. There will be a costume contest, a silent auction, a red flag book sale, and baked goods.
Okay, and now going into the podcast for today, we are interviewing Peyton Wahl. She's a PhD student here at FSU, and she is writing her whole dissertation on Gothic literature. So we thought that would be perfect for the month of October, you know, spooky, that whole vibe. And we kind of wanted to interview her about just her time at FSU so far, what are her thoughts on the PhD program here, and to get information on Gothic Lit itself, so kind of like a Gothic Lit for Dummies episode, and how history and the things that have taken place affected the literature scene and caused this development of Gothic literature.
And then we also just wanted to highlight that courses are open and cards have opened for classes.
And Peyton Wahl specifically is teaching a contemporary lit course focused on Gothic literature, so modern adaptations of like Rebecca, Frankenstein, all that cool stuff, so you definitely don't want to miss out on it. The prefix is LIT 2081, and we'll put it up here
on the screen up somewhere behind
for you guys to see it. So yeah,
tune back in for interviews with graduate students and faculty members, as well as book reviews.
Monthly.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today we have Peyton Wahl. She's a PhD student and she focuses in Gothic Lit. So we wanted to have her on for the month of October. Perfect for spooky vibes and all that.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So first, we wanted to start off with some basic questions about your time at FSU, you know, how you chose FSU for your PhD program, how your time here at FSU has shaped your career path.
Yeah, totally. I started here in 2020, which is not a great time to start a graduate program, but it went really well. I am from a really small town in Alabama, and I went to a really small university for my bachelor's and my master's. So while that was great, and I loved, you know, every second of it, I really wanted to be exposed to a department that had like a wide variety of like focuses. So when I was applying, I was looking for places that had like really strong Victorianists and like Gothic people that specialize in Gothic Lit, and landed here with Dr. Barry Falk and Dr. Pascoe and Dr. Kennedy and things. But it's been really great because I've been able to have classes that focus on areas outside of what I do, and that's like broadened what I have, you know, what my work looks like, right? Like taking classes with professors that are in you know, African American Lit or Global Lit or things like that has really, you know, helped me a ton. So I've enjoyed that aspect of it here.
Yeah, I took a class with Judith Pascoe, and I had been talking to Peyton about it, and she had made like the whole reading list, and it was such an amazing course. So if you ever get the chance, take both of their classes. Oh, and I wanted to highlight that next semester you're teaching a Gothic Lit and contemporary literature course.
Yes.
If you want to like talk about that a little.
Yeah, totally. I am teaching the contemporary literature class, and I'm teaching it as contemporary Gothic. And I'm doing a lot of Gothic adaptations, so a lot of adaptations of like traditional Gothic stories, like Frankenstein, Jane Eyre, things like that. So we'll be doing Rebecca and Frankenstein in Baghdad, and a lot of really cool like modern interpretations of the Gothic. So
that was another question that we had. We were like, what constitutes something being Gothic? And also, this is kind of a silly question, but like, is Twilight considered like modern Gothic? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the question of like what is the Gothic is so hard to answer because like it's such a nebulous kind of genre. But I think my favorite kind of way of understanding it is Judith Wilt, is a scholar in like the 1980s, wrote that the Gothic is concerned with one character who is like bound and determined to uncover like the truth, right? And grappling with how hard it is to recognize the truth and to live with it and to kind of like just bear witness to what it is. So if you think about like Jane Eyre, the entire text is like her trying to figure out what's going on in the house and what's happening with the woman in the attic and things like that, and how crushing it is to live with the truth of like your life, right? And so you have like the supernatural kind of stuff that's, you know, super important, but it's very like focused on the individual and like experience and stuff like that. So there's a lot of, I guess you could say, purists that are like, no, the Gothic has to exist in like the 18th century or the 19th century. I say no. Let's say that Twilight is the Gothic. If we're concerned with like the individual and their like progression of their life and like their understanding of their true self, and if we have these themes of like enclosure and you know, fighting against something that's like keeping you trapped, right? And if we can throw some supernatural stuff in there, why not?
Right. Okay.
So,
I love that. Yeah. That's also like, sorry, I was just gonna say, you made me think of a question we also discussed the other day, which is like when you were like focusing on Gothic literature, obviously, like did you talk about the historical stuff with that? I'm assuming that's a huge part of learning about it, and like
about the context of what led to Gothic literature becoming the norm.
Right. Because when people are like thinking about Gothic literature proper, they stick it in the 18th century with like these early Gothic texts that are using Gothic, the term, to think of something that's like really like barbaric or like not modern in some way, right? So it's cool to think about how it's evolved from like this use of like Gothic as like unrestrained and not like kind of confined into something that we have now that is just Gothic in the sense of it being like responding to something in like our culture. So like my work is mainly in the 19th century, and for like cultural kind of stuff in the 19th century, a lot of the Gothic is concerned with like the sciences like that are developing. So you get Frankenstein that's definitely responding to science. And Dracula, that's concerned with like blood transfusions and like things like that. So it's really fascinating to look at how history has changed the genre. Even now, like a lot of our modern Gothic and like contemporary Gothic is concerned with like technology and like war and like modern things like that, and how like war has been evolved into the modern day. So it's like one of those things where we can keep tracking.
Like Gothic Lit is always evolving and changing.
That's cool.
So like 100 years from now, it's going to be completely different, right? And it'll be responding to the same kind of like societal issues, which is really cool.
I remember from my Gothic Lit class, we were doing 17th century a lot, and 18th century, and in the 17th century, you know, there was the Black Plague, and it took out like 1/3 to half the population of Europe. And so a lot of people were so concerned with this idea of life and death, and a lot of people were getting buried alive. So there were a lot of Gothic short stories about that. And then you also had like the first vampire story by Polidori. And it's just so interesting that that contemplation of life and death comes from the historical context of the plague.
Yeah, definitely. And like in the 19th century, you get spiritualism, which is where people are like having seances and like communicating with the dead, and it's like that was a pretty big thing, like a big like pop culture thing that the texts were responding to. So something like, I guess, less morbid, but still, you know, having a huge impact on the lit, which is really cool.
So how did you happen upon Gothic Lit as a concentration?
Yeah.
Like, did you start undergrad,
Is there
or
a
did you?
specific class you took, or like anything?
Yeah, so I actually, I mean, I've always been like drawn to like horror novels. So like before I was even like in like college, I was reading mostly like horror and like Gothic texts that I didn't really know the term for yet.
Yeah.
So it was something that I was always interested in. But in my undergrad back in Jacksonville, I took it was like an intro to like literary studies class where we literally just read Frankenstein and spent the entire class like dissecting it in like different like literary theories. So we did like feminism and queer theory and like Marx theory and all sorts of stuff, and that kind of opened up like this genre for me. Like if I could do it for Frankenstein, I could do this for literally everything else, and read really cool and weird and like interesting text, right? So that's kind of how I landed there. And then when I was figuring out like a specific area of interest, I was really drawn to ghost stories and like spiritualism and things like that, which is kind of how my area of like interest has evolved and like gotten really specific as I've gotten all like further in the program.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your process with your whole dissertation and doing your PhD?
Yeah, totally. So right now I'm in my prospectus. So that means that I am writing basically a kind of like a pitch for my dissertation to say like what I want to write about, and then after that I'll write my dissertation and so on and so forth. But before that you have classes, and then you take a prelim exam where you're kind of like tested on your knowledge of like the field and everything. But as of right now,
read like 100 novels or
Yeah,
something. They like give you a really
that's what
long
I've heard.
my list was close to, I think, with my minor list and everything, close to like 200 things. It wasn't
That's
all
insane.
it wasn't all novels. It
Yeah.
was like some articles and some
Okay.
short stories,
Yeah.
so that
That's
helps.
so cool though.
Yeah, it was terrible, but in the best way.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It was a lot of work, but like looking back on it, I'm very happy that it happened.
Yeah.
Right,
Right.
because I read a lot of stuff that I probably would have never gotten around to, and it was a very long and arduous process, but it was very worth it.
To be that knowledgeable on such a niche subject
Right.
is so satisfying.
Yeah.
It is, right? And to say like just some random obscure book from the 19th century, like I read that and wrote like 1 million pages on it. So
That's crazy.
yeah.
For your dissertation, what is it specifically on? Like, is it on specific novels that you read, or?
Yeah, so every time I talk about it, it gets a little bit more specific as I'm like continuing to work. It's kind of focused on the last 2 decades of the 19th century, the 1880s and the 1890s, and on like theosophical works, which is theosophy is like a religion that kind of grew out of like the like spiritualist kind of craze.
Okay.
A lot of ideas about reincarnation and stuff like that. So the novels that I'm working with are novels that are mainly focused on reincarnation.
Okay.
So I'm trying to talk about how reincarnation was used by these specific authors, Rosa Prade, Marie Corelli, Florence Marriott, and Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Jekyll and Hyde. How they're using reincarnation to discuss like imperialism and like the effect of like imperialism on like specifically British people, but also Rosa Prade is Australian, so seeing how there's like this global reach and how they're kind of discussing it through the medium of like having their characters reincarnated and this idea that there is no death and we live on in like other vessels like after we die.
It's such a cool theory. Like, I've read so many articles about in real life people, like little kids, knowing this exact location of where something's buried that they should have like no idea where it is. So I love that kind of thing.
It's wild, and it's people that, or it's a concept that people like genuinely like fully vested themselves into and fully believed. And so it's cool seeing how like these movements that like developed really quickly in the 19th century in England and like abroad were very real and had very real followings, and then affected the literature of people that had nothing to do with
Yeah.
like the group. So like Stevenson, not at all like involved in theosophy, but was very much writing about the same kind of things.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's really cool kind of to dig into that kind of stuff.
That is amazing.
So interesting.
Mm.
Do you have any favorite Gothic novels that, like, when people ask you, you're like, these are my
This is
top
the one to
ones?
read, yeah.
Yep. Not to be stereotypical, but every single person, if you're watching, you should read Jane Eyre.
I
please.
love Jane Eyre so much. I love that.
It's kind of like the quintessential text for me. Like, we have like the enclosure of the woman and like this like female like plight, right? And it gets into this discussion of like, what is the female Gothic? And female Gothic is something that was like coined in the 70s, and people have like debated over and over again about if it exists, and like if there's a way that women are writing the Gothic that's different than just the Gothic proper, right?
Okay.
And Jane Eyre kind of gets at that, like how Jane goes through many different like crises of faith and crises of her own like ability like to know herself, right? And so that's why that one's always my biggest.
It's interesting you say that, because when you said it earlier, I was like, Jane Eyre is a Gothic Lit. Like when I read it in high school, and we didn't ever touch on that as like being a theme for it, you know, as Gothic Lit.
Yeah, and that's why it's fun to kind of like expand the boundaries of what Gothic Lit is, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm thinking like beyond Jane Eyre, like Frankenstein, of course, is one of the best like examples, and it's very like gritty and Gothic in the sense that we know it, right? But Jane Eyre is very like insular, right? And concerned with her like identity and who she is and how she's gonna like come to know herself,
right?
And like we have the supposed haunting and like the woman trapped in the attic, right?
That's also like we were wondering what constitutes like, I don't know if feminist Gothic Lit is the right term,
like
but like
how women
the
are
difference
portrayed in
between
Gothic
that,
Yeah, and that's what I kind of mentioned just then was the female Gothic, and this is something that has been like debated hotly about if it exists or not. But it's this idea that the women who are writing Gothic texts are writing them with a purpose, and they're writing them to kind of express frustration with some kind of societal like constraint. So like Jane Eyre is in a lot of ways responding to like restrictions like placed on women and like women's sexuality and things like that. And I think that we see that in a lot of feminist or female Gothic literature. It by extension becomes feminist because it's kind of discussing the ways and like kind of rebelling against the ways that we are trapped, right? There's another novel, Villette, also by Bronte, about how like you become like trapped in an environment, but then also in your own mind, and then also in a relationship. It's responding to how to get out of that, right?
Have you read The Yellow Wallpaper?
Oh yeah.
Would that be considered Gothic Lit? I know she's trapped in her mind. She's trapped in every sense.
Yeah, I think so, and that brings up like the difference between like the like American Gothic and like the English Gothic that I mostly work with. But like with the American Gothic, you have her and you have Poe and all of these other people that are doing the same kind of thing with like their own like interpretation. And so definitely The Yellow Wallpaper. It's very like psychological and very like something is happening, but we don't know what it is. And like with a lot of other Gothic texts, it ends up being like nothing, right? There's nothing actually happening, but it's something within the character's mind.
That's what I love so much about it, the fact that it's so exploratory of the self. Like, who are you? I just love how individualistic it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very interesting.
Are there any like quote-unquote modern novels that you would recommend for like Gothic Lit? Is there anything you've read recently that's come out in the past like 10 years that like fits that category for you?
Oh, in the past 10 years. There's a novel called Strega, which it's a Swedish, I believe, novel. I'm actually teaching it in that contemporary Gothic class. Yeah. It's about a bunch of girls that are sent off to work at like a fancy like resort hotel as like maids or whatever. And there's a lot of supernatural like occurrences, and it's very like Again, dealing with the entrapment, they aren't able to leave, right? And one of them goes missing, and it's wonderful. And I won't spoil it.
Yeah,
but
take the class.
Yes, take the
Read
class,
it.
and you can read it.
Yes.
But yes, definitely I recommend that. And then like the quintessential like contemporary Gothic text is like Rebecca, which is playing with Jane Eyre, right?
Yeah.
And that's the coolest thing about contemporary Gothic is that it's playing with these old like stories that we all know really well.
What are your opinions on The Haunting of Hill House, the show? Do you think they did a good adaptation?
I like the show as a show, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for what it is, I loved it, right? And I like the idea of it being like a family unit, but I think that it kind of takes away a little bit of what made the novel special about like them being completely disconnected people, right? That didn't know one another and all had these kind of experiences.
They were all like lost people.
Right,
They were trying to find family. So the fact that these people already had family, kind of needed that.
Yes, exactly. And I like the way that they kind of like disconnected the family and broke it up to kind of maybe get back to that. But I did think that the show did a lot of things really well. But I did miss that kind of, like you said, found family and kind of like disconnect of it, right?
Yeah. And just having the main character, I can't remember her name, but her as like the sole focus.
Yes.
I really loved that. And I feel like that's could be used as another example of how women are shown in Gothic.
Yes, you're exactly right. And it kind of being her story kind of being taken over in the show, right? Where we only kind of find out that she's like the main character like halfway into the season, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Also, Lapvoia? I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's by Otessa Moshfegh.
Oh, yes. I have not gotten to that one.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I have no idea.
Lapvoia.
I know it's got a sheep on the cover.
Yeah. But I've heard people say it's contemporary Gothic Lit, and I've heard it takes place in like a medieval town.
Love that.
With a peasant, and I'm like, okay.
It's kind of like The Witch, the movie.
I didn't see that.
Oh.
The Witch?
Maybe I'm thinking of a different movie, but it's like, I don't know. Never mind.
That's a very good movie. It's the same kind of thing, like rural, like peasantry kind of vibes, and like there's like a ghost or a spooky kind of thing that's haunting them. But it's great, perfect for the season.
Yeah, spooky season
for October.
Yeah, love it.
And then I wanted to highlight this one painting that's like quintessential Gothic, and I'm sure you know it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli.
I guess.
Fuseli?
I think she's gonna be behind.
Yeah, we're gonna put it up on the green screen, and I just wanted to talk about that a little. Do you want to talk about it at all? Do you really?
Yeah. The like, because when you think of like Gothic, like visual art, there's like like what we know as Gothic, where we have like Gothic architecture and like the use of like Gothic as like primal, I guess, or like barbaric, or not like super refined or whatever. That's kind of going back to like the French Goth, or the what was or is now France Goths, versus like post like Gothic Lit, where we get this. And
so there's like the two different categories.
Because if you look up like Gothic art, it's going to show you like old art that's like Gothic architecture and stuff like this. This is, it's sometimes referred to like as Gothic revival art or things like that. And it's very cool because it's always playing with like, as you can see,
there's like supernatural
you can see
things.
here.
I have it on my phone as well.
But even like in just like the composition, it's like lots of like really darkness and the really like lightness of like her dress and everything, like really juxtaposed against like all of the darkness of the background, right? Playing with that like darkness and light, the good and evil, right? The balance of it, right?
And the fact that it's a woman in the painting I find really interesting. And there's a horse in the background and an incubus, which is like this little creature that keeps people in dreams and like feeds off of their nightmares and like gives them these nightmares, and sometimes they like rape them. It's crazy stuff.
It's horrible.
It's very scary, but again, going into the dark themes of these nightmares and the terror of it all. And a mare is an evil spirit that tortures humans while they sleep. So that's what the little thing in the back. So I think it's just crazy that Gothic Lit went into so many areas of
Yeah.
the art world, not even just literature, like art, music.
Yeah.
I also don't know if you would consider Hosier Gothic, but I feel like he has some that they give like Gothic.
Yeah, I think so. And like Ethel Cain, like she's
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And she's very much like Southern Gothic, which is like a branch of the Gothic that's dealing with like, while a lot of like the Gothic proper is very much like prim and proper and like these estates and these really rich fancy people, the Southern Gothic is like gritty and like really like emotional and things like that. Like you think of like people that are running from like a past or like running from crime or whatever. And Ethel Cain really channels that so perfectly into her stuff, and
she
I love it.
She has such a haunting voice.
Yes,
exactly.
And going along with that, I also know some people say that Dante's Inferno is Gothic, and then other people debate that it's not because it predates the time of like, Gothic Lit. But I know that Ethel Cain uses the influence of the Inferno, and she has the one song Ptolemy.
Yeah.
So terrifying. I feel like that's like the perfect Gothic Lit song. Yeah.
And she's just wonderful, and like
she is.
And one thing about the Gothic is it has a very kind of like storied history with religion, like especially Christianity, and that's one thing that is like, I think in my opinion, central to like Southern Gothic is like this
religious
dealing with
Christian
especially Christian.
Dealing with like religious imagery, and that's something that, you know, both Hosier and Ethel Cain do so well. Like having these religious kind of like images and icons, right? To serve like a different purpose, right? To use them as a vessel for something, which is really cool to me. And even if, you know, Dante's Inferno isn't Gothic proper, it's dealing with the same kind of things, right? Like a quest.
It has many ties. It might not technically be it.
Exactly. Like a quest for like truth, like like I said, or like dealing with like enclosure and like restrictions and obviously the like religious kind of entire aspect of Inferno, and how especially the early Gothic was just very much trenched in like religion, right? The first few like major Gothic texts are responding to religion in some way, so it makes perfect sense to lump it in there, especially for me, who I'm like, let's just, you know,
if we
get
can
rid
make
of all of
why not make the connection?
Exactly.
I feel like majority of things can be like lumped into
That's why like it's a nebulous genre, but it's one that has, you know, really important aspects, right? And if we can kind of connect all of those, I don't see why something like Hosier or like Ethel Cain can't be Gothic,
I feel like that's the point of literature anyway. It's like evolve, you know, connect stuff. It's fun. It makes it interesting.
If it works, it
works. It's less fun if there's rules.
So what was the class you're teaching again when we close it out?
It's Contemporary Lit is the section 4, I believe. The subtitle is the Contemporary Gothic.
Everyone should take it.
Thank you. Yes, please. It'll be lots of fun.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I had
that
so
was
much
amazing.
fun. Of course, guys.
Okay.
Bye.